Hey guys, so I'm back active on Tranquility again. I've been doing a lot of frigate PvP, and I've been flying the Breacher a lot recently. I think the Breacher is one of the best T1 frigates in the game, and it's probably my favorite solo frigate today. What really makes it shine are its active tanking ability, and the fact that it can fit two active tanking mods, a shield booster and an armor ripper, and the fact that it uses rockets. So I think rockets are just a very versatile weapon, and they're one of the best small weapon systems in the game right now, in my opinion. Its active tank also makes it very, very strong in 1 versus 1 frigate duels because you could usually just outlast your opponent and win DPS races because of your tank. It's also one of the more difficult frigates to pilot well, and I usually don't recommend this ship to raw newbies as a first ship to train into. As far as missile frigates go, I think Kestrels are a bit more suitable for newer players because they're a simpler ship to fly, and they're also very strong. So they're pretty good. So if you're into missiles, I would start off with a Kestrel, and if you have a bit more PvP experience, maybe start looking into the Breacher. So I'll talk a bit more about the fits I've been using. There's two major fits that I've been using, which are actually pretty much identical apart from the prop mod. The first one is kind of a standard Afterburner Scram web fit, which is dual tanked with the ASB and an AAR, and I think this is a pretty standard low sec style faction warfare fit, which has been reasonably popular among low sec frigate PvPers for the past 2 years or so. I'd like to use 1 damage rig and 2 resist rigs on this, and I've kind of settled on this after some experimentation because if you don't fit these resist rigs, the biggest problem with this ship then I think is that you have a pretty large EM and thermal resist hole in your shields, and you become extremely vulnerable to lasers or other EM based damage. And today in the modern faction warfare meta, things like Tristans with acolytes are very popular. Slicers are very common. Beam tormentors are very strong, and they're very popular as well. And all those are relatively tough matchups for a Breacher already, and I think just the resist rigs really just help in those matchups and help a lot in winning those fights against things that do lots of EM-based damage. The fit is potentially relatively expensive for a frigate. It's a bit limited on CPU, so you have to use a meta damage control. And the internal force field array is something like 10 million ISK now. It's really gotten ridiculous. And even the pseudo electron containment field is, I think, like gone up to 3 million. So on this fit, I've downgraded just for the sake of cost, just to the F85, which I think is perfectly fine. You don't really lose that much by doing this. And also I'm a big believer in using the metaphor web whenever possible, just because I think the extra speed differential you get when you're scram kiting from having a good web is really important. But the fleeting propulsion inhibitor is also relatively expensive now. If you're really concerned about cost, you could downgrade to the X5, which is really cheap. But yeah, I really like having the best web possible. But unfortunately, it makes the ship cost something like 12 million ISK, I think, which is not too bad for me, but for like a really new player, I remember a time when 12 million was a lot to me. So yeah. And for the scram, I pretty much just always use the meta 3. I don't think the meta 4 scram, I don't think the extra range you get from that like justifies the ridiculous price of it like ever. So I think the J5B is perfectly fine. The micro warp drive fit that I've been using is also pretty much identical. And this fit is actually pretty new because of the compact micro warp drive. So before the module tier side, the meta micro warp drives would take 15 power grid, but the compact micro warp drive now takes only 14. And because of that, that means you could now do dual tank ASB AAR fits with a micro warp drive now, without using any implants and without using any fitting rigs. And I think that's kind of a big deal because before the module tier, before the micro warp drive tier side, this wasn't possible. and I think this fits is really good. I really like this fit a lot. It's really strong as far as micro warp drive brawling frigates go, in my opinion. But because of the extra CPU the micro warp drive takes, you have to use the pseudo electron containment field if you're not using implants. Which, like I said, is something like 3 million ISK now, which is kind of pricey, but yeah, I think it's worth it. I like this ship a lot. As far as ammo goes, you want to make sure that you always have you have damage type selection in this ship, so you will want to make sure you have all the different types of faction rockets that you need, and also you want to have rage rockets. You always want to make sure you have both kinds. So the basic rule of thumb is that if you're fighting against an afterburner fit frigate, then you want to use faction rockets. Otherwise, if you're fighting otherwise you want to use rage rockets. So you can use rage rockets just fine against other frigates as long as they don't have an afterburner. If they have an afterburner, you want to use faction always. So talk a little bit more about what makes a breacher really good. The biggest strength it has, I think, is that the active tank on this ship is just awesome. If you assume that you're able to get all your ASB and AAR charges off without wasting any charges, without over-repping, or without failing to get some of the charges off, then your total EHP is more than 9,000, which is for a T1 frigate is really good. This is kind of like on par with like buffer fit assault frigates actually. So it has a really good active tanking ability. It also has good damage output and damage application with rockets. Its raw DPS is not like the best. It's not as good as a Kestrel, for example, and it's not as good as like blaster ships. But what it does get is, by virtue of having rockets, it does 100% damage application pretty much at any range within 8 kilometers. It has full damage type selection, and it has capless guns, which individually, like, these things aren't like incredible, but the breacher just has lots of little things like this which just add up to make it just the total package really strong. And it does full damage again, like no matter what your range is, as long as you're within scram range, and no matter what your transversal is. So it gives you like a lot of ability to outplay turret-based ships by abusing tracking while still doing full damage yourself. It's also, within its class, within the combat frigate class, it has a very small sig radius, it's 36 meters, and very good speed. So the only combat frigate with better speed and better sig radius is the Rifter. And attack frigates are typically better. But as far as combat frigates go, its sig radius and its speed are both very good, and this makes it a very good scram kiter because it's able to control range very well. So it has a lot of good things going for it. The weaknesses of it are, I think the biggest weakness of this ship is that compared to the other T1 frigates, it has a very high skill floor. And the reason for this is that it has a lot of active modules. It has 2 active tanking modules already, plus it has 2 drones to manage, and the drones are actually a pretty significant portion of its DPS. So like if you forget to deploy your drones or assign drones to your target, which I admit that I do forget to do that sometimes, you actually do lose a lot of raw damage that way. So yeah, this is the biggest reason I don't recommend this to newbies, because it's actually a pretty complicated ship to fly. And like I said, its active tank is potentially more than 9,000 total EHP, but in order to get that, you have to manage your ASB and AAR perfectly. And if you fail to do that, then like if you run your ASB when you don't need to, then like all that potential you could have gotten from its active tank is just gone. And then if you don't have that, the breacher is actually pretty bad. So it requires a lot of micro skills. It requires actually pretty good knowledge of what you're fighting and what you should do in each particular matchup. So yeah. It's also kind of the trade-off by having a really good active tank is that the EHP buffer on this ship is really bad. So it's actually less than 3,000, which is just really awful. It's almost like a heron or something. It's not quite that bad, but it's really bad. So what that means is that, like, if you don't manage your active tanking mods well, or if the incoming DPS just outpaces your active tank, then you're just gonna die immediately. There's really very little margin for error in terms of your tank there. It also has a couple of weaknesses which are specific to the kind of fit that you're using. So the AB fit that I showed earlier it's hard countered by micro warp drive point range kiting ships like Tristans or like the Nano Tristan or Condors, for example, because the projection with rockets is limited to about 10k with faction, and with an AB you don't really have the speed to slingshot things, so you really just have no possible way of winning that kind of match. You're just going to lose immediately, so you have to avoid those kind of matchups. And the micro warp drive fit is to some extent is hard countered by brawlers who fit Afterburner Scram Web, because you're not going to be able to control range against them. And so, like, against an AB fit like a Tyrannus, like a dual prop Tyrannus or something like that, they're going to be able to close in on you very fast, and they're going to do enough DPS to overwhelm your active tank, and they're just going to kill you immediately. Like, there's nothing you can possibly do to win that fight unless they screw up. So first we'll look at some fights with the Afterburner Breacher fit first. This is a fight against a Tristan who's fit for scram kiting with 125 railguns. So this fight's basically a DPS race between me and him, and this is the kind of fight where the Breacher actually really shines in this kind of faction warfare scenario. What I want to talk about in this fight is how to manage your active tank. What I do is I allow myself to bleed through shields and armor, and then I run my mods at the same time as needed. I really think this is the most efficient way to run your tank, because this gives you the best chance of getting all your charges off without dying through reps. What I see some people do sometimes is they run their ASB till it runs out of charges, and then they start running their AAR. And the problem with doing this is that the armor repper only reps 76 EHP per second, and the Breacher has very little EHP buffer, so it's pretty likely to die through reps before it's able to get all its AAR charges off. Breacher's tank is really, really strong in 1v1 fights. If you manage to get all your charges off and you don't over-rep or waste charges, then you can out-tank a lot of buffer-fit assault frigates. It's very important to micromanage your tank very well, because if you waste any charges unnecessarily, then like all that tanking potential you could have had from your active tank is gone. So this Ishkur has railguns, but he's having tracking issues with his guns because I'm orbiting. Orbiting is something you pretty much will always want to do, because rockets will do 100% damage regardless of what your transversal is, but you can reduce incoming DPS against turret-based ships like this by quite a lot if you do this. This fight is reasonably close. I do have to use almost all of my active tank charges, but then again it's an assault frigate, and he has probably triple the EHP buffer that I do. And he does quite a lot of DPS with drones, so I hope this fight just shows just how good the Breacher's active tank can be. The Breacher is also very fast for a combat frigate, and it's a very strong scram kiter, because rockets will do full damage out to the edge of scram range. The Breacher is about equally fast as a plated comet, and you have the ability to control range against most brawling ships. It's also very, very common for blaster ships to not carry or use null ammo for some reason, and without that they'll do 0 damage at 7.5 km, so it's a pretty big mistake to do that, and I don't even need to use my active tank at all in this fight because of it. If he had been using null ammo, this fight could potentially have been very close, or I could potentially have lost. You do need to be very careful to stay outside of blaster range though, and heat your afterburner if you need to, because a comet will easily do enough DPS at close range to overwhelm your active tank, and if that happens you'll just die almost immediately. A rail combat has to be fought differently because at 7 km they can outdamage you by a significant margin. So here I decided to orbit at 500 in order to outtrack his guns. And again, because I have rockets, I'm still doing full damage at this range and at this transversal. Well, in return, he's missing most of his shots with his railguns, and I'm really only taking drone damage from him. So, again, this is a really big strength of rockets. It's just your ability to do full damage at anywhere within scram range, regardless of what your range is or what your transversal is. It just makes this ship really, really good. He did make a pretty big mistake here. If he would have double-clicked in space somewhere and heated his afterburner, this would make it a lot more difficult for me to maintain the orbit that I have. And also, if he would have reloaded to javelin ammo, then he'd be doing a lot more DPS to me. So the micro warp drive breacher is very good at killing fast kiting Tristans. This Tristan is actually moving at 4,100 meters per second, which is unusually fast for a Tristan. And he's actually much faster than I am. I suspect that he has a full set of high-grade snakes, actually, but even against things that are faster than you can still slingshot people. What I tried to do is I did just catch him on the initial approach, but I screwed up and missed him because I didn't have my web preheated, which was a pretty big mistake by me, but it's fine. So I slingshotted him after that. To do that, you just double-click in space away from him. And you want to watch the angular velocity on your overview. And when that drops, then you hit approach on him and go for tackle with your web and scram preheated. So I did that, and I was able to slingshot him. It also helps to heat your micro warp drive when you're slingshotting fast ships like that. But in this particular case, it turned out to not be necessary. You can see your Tristans actually still do quite a lot of damage. They're kind of overpowered at the moment, but with rage rockets, I'm still able to just win the exchange here and get the kill. Slicers are quite a bit more dangerous, but they're actually not too tough as long as you're able to catch them early on in the fight. Slicers do a ton of DPS, and they'll really stress your active tank, so it's very important to catch them early on in the fight. Fortunately, I was able to do that here just by chasing them and catching them with a heated web. Once they're caught, Slicers are actually not too threatening. They don't have much of a tank, they don't have much EHP buffer, and their active tank is basically just a small AAR, and it's really not that great either. So Nova Rage rockets can actually finish them off pretty quickly. But against the Slicer, it's just very, very important to try to catch them as fast as possible, because otherwise they're just going to overwhelm your active tank, and you're not going to have a chance of winning. So this is another fight which I think shows just how awesome the Breacher is in a DPS race. This Firetail here that I'm fighting, he's using an autocannon dual prop brawling armor tank fit, which is a bit of a problem for me for a couple of reasons, because because he has an afterburner, it means that I have to use faction rockets against him. So I'm doing a little bit less DPS than I'm capable of. And it also means that he'll be able to close into brawling range on me with his afterburner without much of a problem, which he's able to do here. But the Breacher's strength, it has such a good active tank that I can actually just barely tank the incoming DPS from him. And just in terms of raw, like a raw DPS rates, I actually win the exchange here, which is just a really good win. The Enyo is one of the assault frigates that I think you should definitely engage 1 versus 1 given the opportunity. Particularly if they're fit with blasters, because you can outrange their guns while you still do full DPS with rockets. The Breacher is faster than any assault frigate, so if you're able to start the fight at the edge of scram range, then the Enyo will never be able to close in on you to where it's able to do its full DPS. For a long time, I used to think that you needed to have an Afterburner on your ship in order to scram kite properly, but in reality you don't, as long as your opponent doesn't have an Afterburner of his own. What's really important in this kind of matchup, though, is to make sure that the fight starts at the edge of scram range. Although the Breacher is faster than the Enyo, the speed difference between me and him is actually pretty small. So if the fight were to start at 0 range, I probably would not be able to pull out of his blaster range before getting killed. But since the fight started at 7 km here, it actually turned out to be a pretty easy win. So like I said at the start of the video, I think the Breacher is probably one of the 2 or 3 best T1 frigates in the game right now, and has been for a while. I think this dual tank type of hit is just really, really strong. The other frigates that I think in contention for the title of being the best T1 frigate are the Tristan and the Tormentor right now. The Tristan is just kind of overpowered in light of its weapon system and the fact that the bulkhead rigs kind of disproportionately benefit it, I think. The Tormentor is very strong because small beam lasers got buffed a little bit too much by CCP, in my opinion, and they're just a very, very strong weapon system right now. The Breacher, though, I think is pretty well balanced. It has a potential of, I guess, tanking better than almost any T1 frigate, but it requires almost perfect execution in order to achieve that. And I think in light of that, it's pretty well balanced. It's also a very versatile ship. Both Afterburner and micro warp drive ships fits work pretty well. I didn't show any here, but it's actually very possible to fit it with like light missiles and a tracking disruptor and do like pseudo condor fits too. I've seen people do that with some success. I think it's just a very, very strong hull overall, and it's definitely worth using as a solo frigate. So thanks for watching.